Sometimes the smallest misunderstanding begins with the loudest silence. Rain tapped steadily against the wide marble steps of the federal courthouse as the morning crowd hurried toward the entrance, umbrellas folding, polished shoes clicking across the wet stone, every face focused on the hearing that had already filled local headlines for weeks. Television vans lined the curb, reporters rehearsed their opening lines, and attorneys hurried through the revolving doors carrying thick binders that seemed heavier than the weather itself. Standing just inside the security entrance, Officer Daniel Carter carefully watched every person approaching the checkpoint. He had started his shift before sunrise after reading another courthouse security bulletin reminding every officer that unauthorized access had become an increasing concern. His responsibility was simple: verify every visitor. Follow procedure. Leave nothing to chance. Across the plaza, a quiet woman in a tailored navy business suit climbed the courthouse steps carrying a worn leather briefcase. She moved with calm confidence rather than urgency, pausing only once to glance toward the large courthouse clock above the entrance. 8 minutes remained before the morning session would begin. She adjusted her grip on the briefcase and continued forward without drawing attention to herself. Unlike the attorneys surrounding her, she wore no judicial robe, no visible identification, and no security escort. To anyone watching, she appeared to be another professional arriving moments before court. Daniel noticed her immediately. She headed toward the restricted hallway leading directly to Courtroom 3 without stopping at the public reception desk. He stepped forward with practiced professionalism and raised an open hand. "Ma'am, I need to verify your authorization before you continue." The woman stopped politely. Her expression remained remarkably composed. "I understand," she answered. "I simply need to reach the courtroom before the hearing begins." Daniel nodded but remained firm. "May I see your courthouse credentials?" She looked briefly toward the courtroom hallway, then back at him. "I would prefer not to." Delay the session. Around them, the flow of people slowed almost imperceptibly. A young attorney glanced over his shoulder before continuing inside. A television cameraman adjusted his equipment, sensing unexpected tension near the entrance. Rainwater dripped from umbrellas onto the polished floor, creating small reflections beneath the bright lobby lights. Daniel maintained a respectful tone, yet his posture became more resolute. Everyone entering this area must follow the same procedure. The woman offered a small, understanding smile. "I appreciate that." She shifted the leather briefcase slightly, but the handle slipped from her damp hand. The case struck the marble floor with a sharp echo. Its latch opened. Legal folders, neatly organized only moments before, spread across the polished entrance as several pages drifted outward in the cool breeze flowing through the revolving doors. The entire lobby seemed to pause. Without complaint, the woman quietly knelt to collect every document one page at a time. Daniel instinctively stepped forward to help, then hesitated, uncertain whether touching confidential legal papers would violate protocol. Neither of them spoke. The silence became louder than the voices surrounding them. Behind the security desk, the courthouse clock continued its slow countdown toward the scheduled hearing. Somewhere deeper inside the building, a ceremonial bell announced that the courtroom would soon open. The woman carefully gathered another folder, her movements steady despite the growing audience. Daniel watched her for a brief moment, noticing the extraordinary calm in her face. Most people argued when delayed. She did not. Most people demanded exceptions. She did not. Yet something about her quiet confidence unsettled the certainty he had carried only seconds earlier. Before either of them could say another word, the heavy courtroom doors at the end of the hallway began to open. The soft glow of dawn had barely reached the courthouse windows when Naomi Brooks unlocked the modest office that would become her chambers. Unlike the grand judicial suites on the upper floor, this temporary workspace contained only a wooden desk, two chairs, a bookshelf lined with worn legal volumes, and a single window overlooking the city awakening beneath a blanket of gray clouds. She preferred it that way. Empty rooms left space for clear thinking. She placed her leather briefcase on the desk and carefully removed every file for the day's proceedings, arranging them with quiet precision until each folder rested perfectly square against the polished wood. Beside them, she placed a framed photograph of her parents, both public school teachers who had spent decades reminding children that character always revealed itself when nobody was watching. Their smiles quietly grounded her before every important decision. A steaming cup of black coffee rested beside a pocket-sized copy of the Constitution, whose corners had softened after years of daily use. She opened the first case file and slowly turned each page, refusing to rely only on summaries prepared by clerks. Every testimony deserved to be read in full. Every signature mattered. Every overlooked sentence carried the possibility of changing someone's future. That habit had earned her admiration from colleagues and frustration from attorneys who hoped a busy judge might overlook inconvenient details. Naomi never did. Her appointment to this courthouse had remained intentionally quiet. Only a handful of senior administrators knew she would preside over today's highly anticipated hearing. She had declined the formal welcome ceremony, the press conference, and even the reserved parking space normally prepared for newly assigned judges. She believed respect should be earned inside the courtroom rather than announced outside it. Before leaving her office, she folded her judicial robe neatly across one arm instead of wearing it immediately. She wanted to walk through the building as any ordinary employee might, observing how people treated one another when they believed no one important was watching. The hallway outside gradually filled with courthouse staff beginning their morning routines. A maintenance worker smiled and wished her a pleasant morning. She returned the greeting with genuine warmth. A young law clerk hurried past carrying boxes nearly stacked above eye level. Naomi quietly opened the heavy hallway door before the clerk reached it, accepting nothing more than a grateful smile in return. Small moments revealed more about an institution than official reports ever could. As she continued toward the courtroom, she noticed bulletin boards displaying community outreach programs, volunteer legal clinics, and reminders encouraging professionalism throughout the courthouse. Those notices reassured her that the building already possessed a strong foundation. Leadership, however, depended upon daily choices rather than printed slogans. She glanced at her watch. 8 minutes remained before the hearing. Plenty of time if everything followed schedule. Adjusting her grip on the leather briefcase, she chose the main public entrance instead of the private judicial corridor. It was a longer walk, but it allowed her one final opportunity to experience the courthouse exactly as every visitor experienced it. She had no idea that within minutes, a simple decision to enter through the front doors would quietly set in motion an event every employee inside the building would remember for years. Officer Daniel Carter had always believed that order was built one decision at a time. Long before the courthouse welcomed its first visitor, he stood beneath the American flag hanging above the main security station, reviewing the morning briefing for the third time. A notice from courthouse administration reminded every security officer that recent attempts to enter restricted areas without proper authorization required heightened awareness throughout the building. The message was clear. Verify identification. Follow procedure. Never assume. Daniel folded the bulletin and slipped it into his notebook before adjusting the badge on his uniform. 15 years of service had taught him that the safest days were usually the ones that began with careful preparation. His fellow officers respected him because he rarely allowed emotions to interfere with professional judgment. Judges appreciated that he treated every visitor with the same calm courtesy, whether they arrived wearing expensive suits or ordinary work clothes. Yet experience had also created an invisible habit. Over the years, he had learned to make quick assessments, trusting subtle observations before paperwork confirmed them. Most of the time, those instincts proved correct. This morning, however, instinct would quietly become his greatest weakness. As the courthouse doors opened, the lobby slowly came alive with movement. Attorneys greeted one another while balancing thick case files beneath their arms. Court clerks hurried between elevators carrying sealed envelopes. Jurors gathered near the information desk, exchanging nervous smiles as they waited for instructions. The polished marble floor reflected the warm lobby lights, while rain continued to streak down the tall glass windows overlooking the courthouse steps. Daniel greeted each arriving visitor with the same practiced professionalism, checking identification, directing families toward public seating, and helping an elderly veteran navigate the security checkpoint without making him feel rushed. Nothing about the morning seemed unusual. Still, his eyes never stopped scanning the entrance. He remembered the security bulletin. One overlooked detail could create unnecessary risk for everyone inside the building. Several minutes before the first hearing, Daniel noticed a woman approaching through the rain. She walked with remarkable composure despite the weather, carrying a weathered leather briefcase rather than the expensive rolling cases many attorneys preferred. She wore a tailored navy business suit that appeared elegant yet intentionally understated. No judicial robe rested over her arm. No visible courthouse credentials hung from her jacket. No assistant accompanied her. She neither searched for directions nor hesitated as she crossed the lobby. Instead, she moved directly toward the restricted hallway leading to Courtroom 3 with quiet confidence, as though she had already memorized the building. Daniel watched carefully. Something about her calm certainty caught his attention. Most first-time visitors glanced toward the directory or paused at the reception desk. She did neither. Remaining courteous, he stepped away from the security station and positioned himself near the entrance to the restricted corridor before she reached it. Around them, courthouse activity continued almost unnoticed. Elevator doors opened and closed. Lawyers discussed final arguments in hushed voices. A television crew prepared outside the courtroom for interviews after the hearing. The atmosphere carried the familiar mixture of anticipation and discipline that accompanied every significant trial. As the woman approached, Daniel offered a respectful nod before raising one open hand. His voice remained steady, polite, and entirely professional. "Good morning, ma'am. Before entering this hallway, I will need to verify your authorization." The woman stopped immediately. Rather than showing annoyance, she returned a calm smile that revealed neither surprise nor frustration. "Of course," she answered softly. "I simply need to reach the courtroom before the session begins." Daniel noticed the confidence in her tone. It was not arrogance. It was certainty. Yet procedure remained procedure. "May I see your courthouse identification?" he asked. For the first time that morning, the woman hesitated. Naomi held Daniel's gaze for a quiet moment before answering. "My identification is inside my briefcase," she said calmly. "Unfortunately, I would rather not open confidential court documents here unless it becomes absolutely necessary." Her voice carried neither impatience nor authority. It was simply matter of fact, spoken by someone accustomed to solving problems without creating larger ones. Daniel nodded politely, but the explanation did not satisfy the responsibility resting on his shoulders. "I understand, ma'am," he replied. "However, courthouse policy requires verification before anyone enters a restricted area. I cannot make exceptions." Around them, the steady rhythm of the courthouse continued, although more people were beginning to notice the conversation. A pair of attorneys slowed their pace as they passed, exchanging brief glances before disappearing down another hallway. A court reporter checked her watch, clearly aware that the hearing would begin within minutes. The distant sound of elevator doors echoed through the marble lobby, blending with the soft patter of rain against the tall windows. Naomi looked toward the courtroom entrance at the end of the corridor. The heavy oak doors remained closed, but only for a few more minutes. She knew the schedule almost to the second. Every participant inside expected the presiding judge to arrive shortly. Still, she made no attempt to reveal her position. She believed deeply that procedures existed for everyone, including those responsible for enforcing them. If respect for the rules depended upon titles, then the rules themselves meant very little. "Officer," she said gently, "I appreciate that you are doing your job. I only ask that we resolve this as efficiently as possible." Daniel appreciated her professionalism. In another situation, he might even have admired her patience. But the security bulletin from that morning lingered in his thoughts. He remembered every line almost word for word. Verify credentials. Protect restricted areas. Never rely upon assumptions. He could not simply step aside because someone appeared confident. "Please allow me to contact courthouse administration," he suggested. "It will only take a moment." Naomi considered the proposal. "That would be acceptable," she answered. Daniel reached for the radio attached to his shoulder, requesting confirmation through the administrative office. Static answered first, followed by a dispatcher explaining that several internal communication channels were temporarily occupied as staff prepared multiple courtrooms for the morning docket. The delay would likely last only a few minutes. Unfortunately, a few minutes were exactly what neither of them possessed. The courthouse clock quietly advanced toward the scheduled opening of court. Naomi glanced once more toward the closed courtroom doors. She remained completely composed, yet Daniel noticed something unusual. She was not worried about herself. She seemed concerned about everyone waiting inside. The realization unsettled him. Most people delayed outside a courtroom focused entirely on their own inconvenience. She appeared to be thinking about the hearing itself. Before Daniel could reconsider the situation, the distant ceremonial chime echoed through the building, signaling that the first morning session was about to begin. At nearly the same instant, the large courtroom doors slowly opened. A court clerk stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of neatly organized files. She lifted her eyes toward the entrance, searching for someone. The moment her gaze met Naomi's face, every trace of routine disappeared from her expression. She stopped walking completely. The folders in her hands lowered by several inches as surprise gave way to immediate recognition. Without saying another word, she turned toward the open courtroom, inhaled deeply, and prepared to announce words that would change the entire morning. Every conversation inside the courthouse seemed to dissolve into silence as the court clerk stood motionless at the threshold. For a brief second, the only sounds came from the rain outside and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Daniel followed the clerk's line of sight, expecting to see another attorney approaching behind the woman. Instead, her attention remained fixed entirely on Naomi. The clerk's expression shifted from surprise to immediate respect, the kind that required no explanation. She carefully placed the folders against her chest, straightened her posture, and disappeared back through the open courtroom doors without saying a word to anyone in the hallway. Daniel frowned slightly. Something felt wrong, though he could not yet explain why. His instincts, normally so dependable, suddenly offered no answers. Naomi remained exactly where she was. She neither hurried forward nor attempted to step around him. She simply waited with extraordinary patience, her hands resting lightly upon the leather briefcase she had already closed after gathering every scattered document. Around them, courthouse employees exchanged puzzled glances. A young associate whispered something to his supervising attorney, who immediately stopped speaking and turned toward the courtroom entrance. Even the television crew positioned farther down the hall lowered their cameras, sensing that an unexpected moment was unfolding before the hearing had even begun. Then it happened. From inside the courtroom came the clear, confident voice of the clerk, echoing through the marble corridor with practiced authority. All rise. Chairs moved almost in unison. The sound of dozens of people standing filled the courtroom beyond the open doors. Judges, attorneys, jurors, witnesses, and spectators alike followed the familiar command without hesitation. Daniel's heartbeat seemed to pause. He slowly turned toward Naomi, whose calm expression had not changed since the moment they first met. She offered him the same courteous smile she had carried throughout their entire conversation. There was no satisfaction in it, no frustration, no trace of resentment, only quiet understanding. For the first time that morning, Daniel realized that every assumption he had made rested upon appearances rather than complete information. Before he could speak, the chief courtroom administrator hurried into the hallway. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, stopping beside Naomi. "Everyone is ready for you." Daniel felt the weight of those two words settle over the corridor. "Your Honor." The realization struck harder than any public embarrassment ever could. This woman had never argued. She had never demanded special treatment. She had never attempted to use her authority to bypass procedure. She had simply trusted that professionalism would eventually guide everyone toward the correct decision. Naomi nodded politely to the administrator before turning toward Daniel. Neither person spoke immediately. The silence between them carried more meaning than any hurried apology could have expressed. Daniel instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path toward the courtroom entrance. "I am very sorry," he said quietly, his voice sincere enough that it barely rose above a whisper. Naomi looked directly into his eyes before answering. "Officer Carter, you were trying to protect the courthouse." She paused gently. "That responsibility deserves respect. The only thing that matters now is what we learn from this moment." With that, she walked through the open courtroom doors. Every person inside remained standing as she approached the bench. Sunlight finally broke through the clouds outside, sending a warm beam across the polished courtroom floor while Daniel remained in the hallway, realizing that the greatest lesson of his career had arrived disguised as an ordinary morning. The courtroom remained perfectly still as Judge Naomi Brooks took her seat behind the elevated bench. The polished oak reflected the soft morning light now streaming through the tall windows, replacing the gray shadows that had covered the courthouse only minutes earlier. Every attorney stood silently, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Naomi adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, opened the first case file, and calmly thanked everyone for their patience. Her voice carried throughout the room with quiet confidence, immediately restoring the sense of order that every courtroom depended upon. There was no hint of irritation in her expression, no lingering frustration from what had happened outside. To every observer inside the courtroom, she appeared completely focused on the responsibility before her. Daniel remained outside the doors for several long moments, unable to move. The words, "Your Honor," continued echoing in his thoughts. He replayed every sentence from their conversation, searching for the exact moment when he could have handled the situation differently. She had never challenged him. She had never demanded special treatment. She had never raised her voice or attempted to use authority she could easily have revealed. Instead, she had chosen patience even while the clock moved relentlessly toward the opening of court. That realization weighed far more heavily than simple embarrassment. It exposed something deeper. Somewhere over the years, confidence in his own judgment had quietly begun replacing careful verification. The very security bulletin he had studied that morning had warned against making assumptions, yet he had unknowingly done exactly that. His supervisor quietly approached from the security station and rested a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You followed procedure," the supervisor said softly. Daniel nodded, though the words brought little comfort. "Procedure matters," he answered, "but good judgment matters just as much." Inside the courtroom, the hearing unfolded with remarkable efficiency. Naomi listened attentively to every argument, occasionally asking precise questions that revealed details both legal teams had overlooked. Her preparation was evident in every decision she made. Attorneys who had expected routine procedural discussions quickly realized they were standing before a judge who had personally studied every page of every filing. Court staff exchanged subtle glances of admiration. Even seasoned lawyers adjusted their presentations, recognizing that careful preparation would be expected from everyone appearing before her. During a short recess, the chief courtroom administrator stepped into the hallway, where Daniel still stood near the entrance. Judge Brooks asked that no one be disturbed during the recess, he explained. Daniel hesitated before speaking. Did she say anything else? The administrator smiled faintly. Only that the security staff should continue doing their jobs exactly as they always have. Daniel looked down for a moment. Those words surprised him more than anything else that morning. She had every opportunity to criticize him privately or publicly. Instead, she had protected both the dignity of the court and the dignity of the officer who had unintentionally delayed her. That quiet act of grace revealed a kind of leadership no policy manual could ever teach. As the recess ended and the courtroom doors opened once again, Daniel returned to his post with a different perspective. Every visitor approaching the entrance still required identification. Every security protocol still mattered. Nothing about his responsibilities had changed. Yet something inside him had. He no longer saw people as situations to process quickly. He saw individuals deserving the same patience he himself had just received. Without realizing it, the most important lesson of the day had already begun reshaping the future of everyone who would walk through those courthouse doors. By the time the afternoon sun settled across the courthouse windows, the story of the morning had quietly traveled through nearly every department in the building. It spread not because anyone wished to embarrass Officer Daniel Carter, but because people were amazed by the extraordinary restraint Judge Naomi Brooks had shown. She had never interrupted the proceedings to mention the misunderstanding. She had never criticized the security staff in open court. She had simply performed her duties with the same professionalism she expected from everyone around her. That decision left a far greater impression than public criticism ever could have. As the final hearing concluded, attorneys gathered their files while jurors slowly exited through the side hallway. Court clerks organized exhibits, courtroom deputies secured confidential records, and the familiar rhythm of the courthouse gradually returned. Naomi remained behind for several extra minutes reviewing a final order before quietly closing the case file. She removed her reading glasses and looked through the tall courtroom windows toward the city beyond. Justice, she often believed, was not measured only by legal decisions. It was measured by the example set by those entrusted to serve it. Outside, Daniel stood alone near the security station after his shift officially ended. He watched visitors leave the building, replaying the morning repeatedly in his mind. Every detail remained painfully clear. The scattered papers, the silence, the courtroom doors opening, the clerk's unmistakable voice. He realized that although he had followed procedure, he had allowed certainty to arrive before understanding. That recognition mattered because it could not be corrected by simply apologizing once. It required changing the way he approached every future interaction. Gathering his courage, Daniel asked the courtroom administrator whether Judge Brooks might have a few moments before leaving the building. Several minutes later, Naomi stepped into the quiet hallway carrying the same weathered leather briefcase. The courthouse had nearly emptied, leaving only the distant sounds of custodians preparing the building for another day. Daniel approached respectfully. "Your Honor," he began, "I owe you more than an apology. I allowed my assumptions to speak before my questions were finished. I cannot change this morning, but I can make certain it changes." "Me." Naomi listened without interrupting. Her expression remained thoughtful rather than judgmental. After a brief silence, she answered with the calm honesty that had defined every moment since they first met. "Officer Carter, every courthouse depends upon people willing to protect it. Security matters. Procedure matters. Accountability matters. But every rule exists to serve people, not replace them. When we remember that, better decisions naturally follow." Daniel nodded slowly. Her words settled into his thoughts with remarkable clarity. "I understand," he replied quietly. Naomi offered a small smile before continuing. "Then promise me one thing." Daniel looked up. "Never lose your commitment to protecting others. Simply make certain curiosity arrives before certainty." Those few words would remain with him long after the conversation ended. Before leaving, Naomi extended her hand. Daniel accepted it with genuine gratitude. There were no photographers nearby, no audience waiting to applaud, no dramatic speeches echoing through marble hallways. Only two public servants sharing a moment of mutual respect built upon honesty rather than pride. As Naomi walked toward the courthouse exit, warm evening sunlight filled the corridor, reflecting across the polished marble floor where the morning's misunderstanding had begun. Daniel remained standing quietly, watching her disappear through the revolving doors, understanding that true professionalism was not proven by never making mistakes. It was proven by having the humility to recognize them, the courage to learn from them, and the discipline to become better because of them. The following Monday morning, the courthouse opened with the same familiar rhythm of footsteps, elevator chimes, and quiet conversations, yet something subtle had changed. New guidance appeared at every security station reminding employees to verify information with patience, communicate clearly, and remember that professionalism was demonstrated not only by enforcing policy, but also by treating every individual with dignity. The recommendation had not been issued as a disciplinary measure. It had been introduced as an opportunity to strengthen an already respected institution. Judge Naomi Brooks had personally requested that the discussion remain focused on improvement rather than blame, believing that lasting trust could never grow from public humiliation. Daniel Carter attended the first training session seated beside officers who had worked alongside him for years. Some expected an uncomfortable review of the previous week's misunderstanding. Instead, the instructor presented realistic courthouse scenarios illustrating how incomplete information, time pressure, and routine could quietly influence even experienced professionals. Daniel listened carefully, recognizing pieces of his own experience in every example. When the instructor invited participants to share situations they wished they had handled differently, Daniel stood without hesitation. The room became silent. "Last week," he began, "I followed procedure, but I allowed confidence to arrive before complete understanding. I never intended to inconvenience anyone. Yet intention alone does not guarantee the best outcome. I learned that professionalism requires both careful verification and genuine curiosity." No one interrupted him. His words carried the weight of honest reflection rather than self-defense. After the session concluded, several younger officers approached him privately, thanking him for speaking openly about a mistake instead of pretending it had never happened. Daniel realized that accountability could quietly encourage others far more effectively than perfection ever could. Meanwhile, Judge Brooks continued presiding over an increasingly demanding docket. Her reputation spread quickly throughout the legal community, not because of the misunderstanding at the entrance, but because attorneys recognized her extraordinary preparation, thoughtful questions, and unwavering fairness. She treated every lawyer with equal respect, whether representing a major corporation or an ordinary citizen. Court staff noticed that she thanked clerks, deputies, and maintenance employees by name, reinforcing the simple belief that every role contributed to justice. One afternoon, the chief administrator informed her that the new communication program had already reduced confusion at courthouse security checkpoints. Visitors reported feeling welcomed while procedures remained just as effective. Naomi smiled quietly. "Then everyone deserves the credit," she replied. "Institutions become stronger when people improve together." As the administrator walked away, he paused for a moment before turning back. "You know," he said with a smile, "many judges would have handled that morning very differently." Naomi closed the file she had been reviewing and looked toward the courthouse entrance visible through the distant hallway. "Perhaps," she answered softly. "But respect cannot be demanded after a misunderstanding. It must be demonstrated during one." Her words lingered in the quiet office long after the conversation ended. Outside, Daniel welcomed another family entering the courthouse for jury duty. He greeted them with the same professionalism he always had, yet now he asked one additional question before reaching any conclusion, listened one moment longer before responding, and offered one more measure of patience than the schedule seemed to allow. Those small changes took only seconds, yet they transformed countless ordinary interactions into moments of genuine public service. Neither Daniel nor Naomi sought recognition for what had happened. They simply allowed one difficult morning to become the beginning of something better for everyone who entered the courthouse afterward. Nearly 6 months passed before anyone inside the courthouse realized how completely one ordinary morning had reshaped the culture of the building. Visitors still arrived carrying heavy folders. Anxious families still waited outside courtrooms. Attorneys still hurried through marble hallways preparing their arguments, and security officers still verified identification with careful attention. Yet the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Patience had become as visible as procedure. Courtesy had become part of routine rather than an exception. Employees greeted one another more often, paused long enough to answer questions thoroughly, and remembered that every person walking through the entrance might be carrying the most important day of their life. Judge Naomi Brooks noticed the change long before anyone mentioned statistics or performance reports. She saw it in the relaxed expressions of nervous jurors, in the confidence of young clerks learning their responsibilities, and in the way experienced attorneys began speaking to courthouse staff with renewed appreciation. Leadership, she often reminded herself, was never measured only by decisions written into legal opinions. It was measured by the character quietly reflected throughout an institution. One crisp autumn morning, Naomi finished an early hearing and left the courtroom carrying only her familiar leather briefcase. Golden sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, stretching across the polished marble floor exactly where scattered documents had once brought an unexpected pause to an ordinary day. As she approached the entrance lobby, Officer Daniel Carter was helping an elderly visitor locate the correct courtroom. He listened patiently, confirmed the information carefully, and walked several steps beyond his security station to point the visitor in the right direction before returning with a reassuring smile. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet Naomi immediately recognized something important. His professionalism had not become less disciplined. It had become more complete. Daniel looked up and noticed her approaching. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. No apology remained necessary. No explanation remained unfinished. Everything that needed to be learned had already become part of their daily actions. Daniel offered a respectful nod. Naomi returned the gesture with the same quiet warmth she had carried since the day they first met. It was a simple exchange, almost invisible to everyone else moving through the lobby, yet it reflected months of growth built upon humility, accountability, and mutual respect. Nearby, a newly hired security officer observed the moment with curiosity before asking Daniel whether he knew the judge well. Daniel smiled gently without taking his eyes from the courthouse entrance. "She reminded me that every person deserves to be seen before they are judged," he answered. "That lesson made me better at this job." The young officer nodded thoughtfully, carrying those words with him as another family approached the security checkpoint. Naomi continued toward the courthouse doors and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The city moved around her with its usual energy, unaware that inside the building behind her, one quiet misunderstanding had become the foundation for lasting improvement. She paused for a moment at the top of the marble steps, looking back only once. Above the entrance, carved deeply into the stone, the familiar words caught the afternoon light: equal justice under law. Naomi smiled softly before walking toward the waiting sidewalk, disappearing into the crowd without ceremony. Behind her, the courthouse continued serving the public exactly as it should, strengthened not by perfection, but by people willing to learn, to listen, and to become better than they had been the day before.